John Ondrasik, singer-songwriter. I'm here at the Reagan Library today, and we're doing the ribbon cutting on the new Gold Star Memorial. Gary Sinise, Woody Williams, such a poignant moment. I can't think of a more appropriate place to have this memorial than 100 feet from Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan.
On this Veterans Day, we're here at the Reagan Library to honor the Gold Star families and honor the ones that didn't come home.
Almost a year ago, Gary Sinise, a true friend of the Reagan Libraries and to our nation's military, veterans and Gold Star families, reached out to me and asked if we would consider a Gold Star Families Memorial Monument on the grounds of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. Gary was working with the Woody Williams Medal of Honor Foundation to establish permanent Gold Star Families Memorial Monuments in communities around the country. He believed that the Reagan Library would be a fitting location. We couldn't agree more.
I don't think that we can ever do enough for the men and women who sacrifice and the families who sacrifice alongside them. But we can always try to find additional ways to do a little bit more to make sure that they know that we do remember and we do appreciate and we are grateful and we do not take it for granted. Our freedom is precious. It must be fought for and protected and handed down to the next generation for them to do the same, as Ronald Reagan said.
The mothers in this great state decided that they needed something to show that their loved one was serving in the military of our country. So they developed a Blue Star flag that they would place in their window to signify that they did have someone in war. If that individual, that son, sacrificed their life, then they would replace it by placing over that flag a Gold Star flag. And that's where a Gold Star comes from.
To see this come to reality, to be a part of this, to be a part of this man's vision, Herschel Woody Williams, and his vision to put Gold Star memorials in every single state in this union so that every single person in this union will never forget the sacrifices of the men and women who serve our country. God bless you, Woody, for your vision, your leadership. It's an honor to be a part of this with you.
So let us all remember what freedom really costs. Never forget the loved ones that many of us lost.
I pitched in a World Series, but I was with the Cardinals at the time. 3 games. It was the 1926 World Series, but I was doing it in 1952 in a movie. I had an edge on all of you in the sense that I knew the script in advance, so I knew it was going to come out right.
The 1984 World Series was the championship series of Major League Baseball's 1984 season, the 81st edition of the World Series. It was a best-of-7 playoff played between the American League champion Detroit Tigers and the National League champion San Diego Padres. The Tigers won the series 4-1. The 1984 World Series program included a painting by Sheila Wolk of various United States presidents throwing out the first ball, and the painting included President Reagan. A lithograph print of that painting was framed and gifted to President Reagan by Pete Uberoff, the Commissioner of Major League Baseball. Thank you for joining us for this week's Monday Minute in the Archives. Join us next week as we share our next treasure.
For this administration, peace through strength is more than a policy. It's a promise we've made to the people and a promise we intend to keep.
It was a unique assignment at a unique time. The Soviets built up a large conventional force that was shielded by a large integrated air defense network that they thought to be impenetrable. Stealth technology, represented by the 117, represented a breakthrough to get through that shield and show the Soviets that they could hold targets at risk inside that shield of integrated air defense. So it went from emboldened to deterred. It was an important part of conventional deterrence in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. When I interviewed for the job, I didn't know what kind of airplane I was going to fly or what I was going to do. The airplane was classified when I first went to it, so it was shrouded within the black, secret, classified world. Didn't know what we were going to do.
I believe it stands today as the greatest secret our nation has ever kept. For 9 years, pilots, maintainers, contractors would gather at a small airport in North Las Vegas, and every Sunday afternoon they'd quietly fly north to Tonopah Airfield, only to return home to their families on Friday night. The entire time, families had no idea what mom or dad did or where they were.
The arrival of the F-117 changed the calculus of war. The F-117 Nighthawk is the epitome of innovation and successful collaboration between the United States Air Force and industry. It's fitting that we gather here at the Reagan Presidential Library, this metaphoric city on the hill, to unveil the F-117 Nighthawk, a visible reminder of President Reagan's mantra of peace through strength.
The F-117 represents the strength of American innovation and the strength of what we can achieve when we work together. The 117 will help educate a new generation of Americans, inspiring young people.
Looking at this plane, it is a triumph of aerospace design. And I'm no engineer, but I think the technical term is badass.
My name is Karl Thatcher. I'm Margaret Thatcher's only daughter, and I saw from the inside in number 10 what it was like for 11 and a half years when she was Britain's first woman Prime Minister. That included, obviously, her relationship with Ronald Reagan and other world leaders when they came to visit. I do remember going into number 10. I'd been to the theatre in London one evening, and it was quite late, and I went in, and my mother had a reputation which was totally justified for working late into the night. And I said, "Hi, Mum, don't want to disturb you. What are you working on?" She said, "Foreign policy, dear." So I said, "Oh." So she said, "Ron Reagan and I will sound the bell for freedom in Europe." One of my mother's aides said, actually, they each believed so strongly, but together they were unstoppable. And it isn't just what they talked about doing, anyone can talk, it's that they delivered. And I think this is what made their partnership, and of course, in relation to the Berlin Wall, such an immense success, indeed a world changer. And they didn't just sound the bell, they delivered. I know President Reagan was out of office by November 1989, but together with Gorbachev, my mother and Ronald Reagan, that action, that success, gave millions and millions of people who lived under communism freedom, and this is what they both so deeply believed in. I remember meeting Ronald Reagan. He had the most wonderful charisma and presence and charm. And I remember someone in the White House telling me that when Mr. Gorbachev and Mrs. Gorbachev went to visit, the crowds outside were very enthusiastic. Of course, he was a very popular international figure, and he was very late, which you don't do if you're invited to the White House. And all the White House staff were getting a bit nervous. Anyway, along came Mr. Gorbachev, and President Reagan said, "Hi, we thought you'd gone home," which of course was brilliant to diffuse, the embarrassment. And after his departure, one of his aides apparently said to him, "Oh, well, Mr. President, I hope you don't mind that Mr. Gorbachev is rather hogging the limelight. He's on every television screen." "Oh, no. You see, I once co-starred with Errol Flynn." He had a line for every occasion, and normally it was a winning one. One slightly amusing story, since we're in the presidential library. When my mother and the other guests that Mrs. Reagan had invited flew from the funeral in Washington, D.C. over here, at the burial, my mother was sitting next to Arnold Schwarzenegger, then governor of California. And she'd left her sunglasses on Air Force One. And of course, there was the Californian sun sinking. And Arnie said, "Oh, well, look, borrow mine." And I think Ron Reagan, who had the most wonderful, charming, twinkling, charismatic sense of humour, would have been amused that his old political mate Maggie said goodbye to him wearing a pair of Terminator shades. They were definitely friends. On several occasions, notes were exchanged on birthdays, which goes well beyond the normal courtesies afforded to fellow leaders. My brother, a twin brother, got lost in a car rally in the Sahara Desert. And when he was found, I understand that Ronald Reagan rang up to say how relieved he was. There was a personal dimension to this political relationship that I don't think is guaranteed between other world leaders. And I really put that back to the fact that they met before they became world leaders. There was a genuine affection, there was a genuine admiration. I remember after she flew to Washington for President Reagan's funeral and then came here for the sunset burial, back in the UK, an American diplomat said to her, "Oh, some of the American people were very appreciative that you actually went to the US for President Reagan's funeral." And she shot back, and I hope I sound like her, "The world owes Ron Reagan a great deal." That was the sentence, and that, I'm sure, was what she thought and what she said.
On the morning of March 30th, 1981, Ronald Reagan put on a brand new blue suit for a speech to the Construction Trades Council at the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Upon finishing the speech, he exited the building. Immediately, shots rang out, all aimed at President Reagan, although 3 additional men were hit and wounded. One of the bullets ricocheted off President Reagan's limousine and went into the president, hitting a rib, passing through his lung, and stopping less than an inch from his heart. When President Reagan reached the hospital staff immediately cut off his brand new suit to get to the bullet wound and to prep him for surgery. Upon getting better, the president realized his brand new suit had been ruined. He asked the tailor to make him another one, and that new version of the suit was worn on June 12, 1987, when President Reagan traveled to the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin and famously declared to Mikhail Gorbachev, "Tear down this wall." Thank you for joining us for this week's Monday Minute in the Archives. Join us next week as we share our next treasure.
Memorial Day is a day of ceremonies and speeches. Throughout America today, we honor the dead of our wars. We recall their valor and their sacrifices. We remember they gave their lives so that others might live.
Memorial Day is commemorated on the last Monday in May each year to remember those who have died in active military service. In 1983, President Reagan was gifted this 1840 U.S. Marine Corps Non-Commissioned Officer Sword. The paper presentation plaque reads, U.S. Marine Corps Sword, last half of 19th century, presented to President Ronald Reagan in memory of U.S. Marines killed in Lebanon, 1983.
We can be worthy of the values and ideals for which our sons sacrificed, worthy of their courage in the face of a fear that few of us will ever experience, by honoring their commitment and devotion to duty and country.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Monday Minute in the Archives. Join us next week as we share our next treasure.
Jonathan, Karl, just terrific to have you today with what I'm sure is a large audience that's growing as I speak, tuning in. It's an honor to have you, Jonathan. I tracked your career for many years, read your book, a great book, Front Row at the Trump Show. This is not your first book, is it, or is this your first?
This is my first book in a long time. I wrote a book back in 1995 after the bombing of the Oklahoma City about the militia movement. So this is the first book in a long time. I just want to say first, it's an absolute honor to be with you. To be at the Reagan Library, even though it is only virtual. I wish I was there in person. It is truly one of my favorite places in the United States, and I've had a chance to visit on multiple occasions, and it's an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much. Now, I know you've been with several news organizations, but with ABC since 2003, is that right?
Yep, January of 2004. That was my first day.
Okay, and of course, America knows you in a lot of roles, co-anchor on This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I remembered this after I read about it, but there must be a name for it, but you have covered every major beat in Washington, D.C., Pentagon, White House, State Department, and Capitol Hill. There's not a lot of reporters who've done that. Is that right?
Yeah, one of the only television reporters that I know that has done that is Bob Schieffer of CBS News. And I tell you, it really gives you a perspective. And so much of it runs through Congress. I spent many years covering Congress for CNN, and then covering Congress again after stops at the Pentagon and the State Department for ABC. But it just gives you a perspective, and of course you have people who funnel through administrations in Capitol Hill, and you really get to see it from all sides. And the thing about the White House, I have had the unbelievable privilege of covering the White House on and off under 4 different presidents, and now I'm up to 14 different press secretaries.
Just amazing. Now, you earned the title. I don't know if they literally people call you this, but you're a dean in the Washington Press Corps now, right? I mean, that's just a phenomenal thing. Let's start with if you haven't read this book, one presumes that, well, Jonathan Karl met Donald Trump probably during the campaign, or as soon as he took the office of the president. But that's not so, right? You have actually known him as long or longer than anyone else in the White House press corps.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing because when I first met him, of course, I probably could not have imagined that either he would have ended up at the White House, or certainly not that he would have ended up at the White House and I would have been there at the same time covering him, because I met him in 1994 in Trump Tower, and it was a very I tell the story in the book. It's really. It's an amazing story in and of itself, but especially given what came after. But I look at, I think that I've known him longer than anybody on the White House staff, with the exception, obviously, of his daughter Ivanka. I mean, it's a long and very interesting relationship.
Yeah, and you were covering for the New York Post at the time. I mean, was there some major story that was occurring that you covered him with, or was this just, years and years of him as a real estate mogul?
Well, I was a very junior reporter for the New York Post. I'd only been working for about 6 months at the newspaper. It was either the number 3 or 4 largest daily newspaper in New York. So I was I was a very junior reporter for the Post. I was an aspiring political reporter. And Rudy Giuliani had just been elected mayor. Actually, I started the day that Giuliani was sworn in. Was my first day at the New York Post, and but I wanted to cover politics, and I'd worked my way up during those first 6 months to be basically like the number 3 guy at the Post at City Hall. 3 out of 3, I mean, I was very junior, and there was this story that had, frankly, I didn't really have a lot of interest in. But it had entirely consumed the city of New York and the newsroom at the New York Post. Michael Jackson, it was revealed on this day, had secretly married Lisa Marie Presley. So I mean, you can imagine this is like the tabloid story of the ages. The King of Pop, the daughter of the King of Rock and Roll. They hadn't been seen in public yet, but it was revealed on this day, and I was at City Hall. So far away from it. It was revealed on this day that they were staying at Trump Tower, the newlyweds, and they had not been seen. So you can imagine what happened in New York. All the paparazzi moved towards Fifth Avenue and Trump Tower. All of the television stations had their camera crews out there. All of the onlookers, fans of Presley, fans of Michael Jackson. They were all there trying to catch a glimpse. It was so much so that the police actually set up yellow tape and kind of a cordon around Trump Tower to move everybody across the street. And I, just on a total whim, because nobody cared what the number 3 guy for the Post was going to be reporting that day out of City Hall, I looked up in the phone book, literally, the number for the Trump organization, and I asked to speak to Donald Trump. I had never met him. Of course, I knew who he was, but I had never met him. He had no idea who I was. And I got through to Norma Federer, who was a longtime secretary for Donald Trump and somebody very close to the family, really a remarkable person. She was the gatekeeper and integrally involved in everything, but she had the desk right outside of his office on the 26th floor of Trump Tower. I didn't know any of this, by the way. I just asked for Trump, and then I got this woman on the line. And I said, I have a story I want to pitch to him. And she said, well, what is it? And I said, why would the most famous newlyweds on the planet begin their honeymoon at Trump Tower? And I got a call back in less than an hour. And Trump was on the line himself and said, come on over, I'll show you. And I got a photographer with the Post. His name is Francis Specker. We hustled up to Trump Tower, went right past the police lines, into the elevator, up to his office, and there began this relationship. The story was great, by the way. Donald Trump couldn't have been friendlier or more entertaining during this time. He toured, showed us all around Trump Tower. I met Michael Jackson's bodyguards. He showed me where they were staying. He even showed me, and by the way, the Post the next day, cover story, of course. And like 4 or 5 stories inside, including one that was a lot of fun, which was how the famous newlyweds got in and out of the building without being spotted. Because he showed me in the basement the tunnels that could take you out to another exit where nobody would see you. It was really fun. But at about halfway through this hour or so that I spent with him running around Trump Tower, he asked me if I wanted to get a picture taken with him. which of course I did, and I have the photo. You want me to show it to you? I've got.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So let's see. I'll try to make. Yeah. So this is this is the photo, and this is August of 1994, and when I had actually kind of lost track of this photo when he became president. I did a frantic search because I had moved a couple of times. I'd been living in New York, obviously at that point. I'd moved to DC, 20 some years ago, and I found the old photo, and it's amazing to me, first of all, how little the guy's changed. I mean, how many shots have you seen of him looking exactly that way? Red tie, dark suit, that smile that he has there, but behind the resolute now,
Yes, yeah. Well, and this is why you did not remain the number 3 report for the New York Post.
So we're very happy with me on that day.
I bet. That's terrific. Well, so it's interesting with a story like that, and you've known him as long as you have. When candidate Trump was elected, I have to tell you, I was one of the 95% of Americans who were surprised. It turns out that you were too. And this is after covering the campaign right up through election night. I guess no one wanted to believe it. At least people would say, well, that would be the case. No one in the media wanted to believe it, but they just weren't seeing this. How do you, I used to think I was good at this. I used to peg who would win these races, but I missed it. And I guess a lot of other people did too.
Yeah, and I think that the biggest lesson of that, and by the way, I have a chapter in the book where I really went back and looked at election night and looked at what led up to election night and why we were all, so off base. And by the way, I think that the results surprised Donald Trump too, truth be told, and certainly a lot of people around him. But I go back and really look at that and describe in detail what was going on behind the scenes at ABC election night headquarters in New York as we were seeing the results come in. The end result is is to remind us to have some humility and to realize that you may feel certain something is going to happen and you would be wrong. And we'll see. The voters ultimately, of course, get to decide. But he won. Let's be clear. Donald Trump won the greatest. It was the greatest political upset in American history. I mean, here was somebody with no previous electoral experience and no government experience, no military experience. We never saw anybody get elected president without one or the other, and some in both. So here you have somebody who comes in and wins this race against all the odds, shocking all the experts. And I tell the story of a really young guy on the ABC political team called Ryan Struck. He actually now works over at CNN, but he went to Calvin College, now Calvin University in Grand Rapids, and he was a double major in political science and math. So that immediately set him apart from just about everybody else in a newsroom. He was a math guy, but he was also from Grand Rapids, and his father is a pastor. I mean, he didn't have the typical background of your hardened political reporter, but he was really smart, really smart guy, and knew the numbers and knew Michigan really well, by the way. And he had been analyzing everything through the course of obviously through the course of the election, but election night, and he was the first one among us who said, look, I think Trump's going to win this thing. And he said it very early on as he was watching returns coming in, and he was watching Michigan. And long before we could call Michigan, he was seeing where the votes were coming in. And he, Ryan knew it was going on a lot earlier than most of us.
You use the word humility, Jonathan. A lot of people had to eat some crow or accept the results that they didn't expect to come. Maybe it wasn't the word humility, but humble, I think, was a word you described in one of the chapters of your book about, this is after President Trump, candidate Trump's been elected president, though it's president, this is the transition. He's going to meet President Obama, I think, for the first time in the Oval, and you happen to be there that day, that moment, and you describe President Trump maybe as the only moment that you've ever detected where you felt in the room with President Obama in the Oval for the first time. There was the word humble came into your sentence, right? And can you describe that moment for us? Because it's really unusual to imagine that.
Yes. So, and by the way, this gets at that moment was one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because I realized, this has been such an exhausting period for a political reporter, a White House reporter, because Donald Trump generates more news than any human being or group of human beings we've ever witnessed. And we're always running and chasing and, nonstop breaking news. And it's been that way for really since he announced his candidacy, let alone since he's been in the White House. But I realized as I looked back that I had been with him at so many critical and historically significant junctures. Obviously going back to 1994, I was with him in Iowa on his very first trip of the 2016 cycle back in 2013, 2 years before he ran for president. And I had the first network interview with him. And I was with him in many critical points during the campaign. But then that moment, this was one where you feel history. A lot of us I got into journalism because I was probably a failed history student. I would have gone and become a history professor somewhere. So the next best thing was to be on the front lines, the front row seat to history. And this was where you just saw history right there. Donald Trump had just won this election victory that shocked the world, certainly shocked most everybody in the press corps, shocked everybody, many people that were on the Trump campaign, frankly, and absolutely shocked everybody that was at the Obama White House. So 2 days after the election, November 10th, 2016, Donald Trump comes down because he's been invited by Barack Obama to visit him at the White House. And he brings with him a very small group of the originalists. Hope Hicks was there, Dan Scavino. These were, Jared Kushner. These were the people that were with him from the very beginning when this campaign was run by a handful of people. I mean, the most skeletal staff we've ever seen. I mean, you see larger staffs on your average, congressional
city council race.
Yeah. So they came with him, and really just that core group came down with him. And I happened to be in the press pool that day. Now, you know how the press pool works. When there's an event in the Oval Office, they can't let the whole press corps come in. It's just not enough room. So there is a single television correspondent, a single newspaper correspondent, the wire reporters, photographers, and that's it. Okay. And I happen to be the network pool correspondent, which means I'm not working for ABC at that moment. I'm working for all 5 television networks. And I'd been in New York for the election. I hustle down, I get to the White House. Eventually the call goes out, press, pool, line up at the, we're going into the Oval Office. They bring us out into the colonnade, by the Rose Garden, right outside the door to the Oval Office. And we wait to go in. Now, usually when the press pool is brought out there, it's for a minute and then you go right in. I mean, no president doesn't want a bunch of reporters hanging outside the Oval Office door for too long. And this meeting had only was scheduled for 30 minutes. Many expected it would last less than 30 minutes. And so we got hustled out there, and we waited and we waited and we waited. And I saw, Hope and Scavino and taking photos in the other part of the colonnade. I saw Jared Kushner walking around the South Lawn with Dennis McDonough, and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting. The meeting went much longer than anticipated. It was like an hour in, and we finally get led into the Oval Office. And the first thing, and I hustle in, and I get right up against the couch, closest to the Rose Garden, and so I'm like a 3 feet from or less from Barack Obama, and like 5 feet or so from from Donald Trump, and I'm the first thing that strikes me is Trump looks entirely, his body language, everything about him seems like different than I'd ever seen him. And then the meeting is called to order, by the president. The president at that point is still Barack Obama, and it's his meeting. Press come in, okay, everybody settle down. All right, we just had a meeting, and he begins the typical thing that you would have and something like this. He talks. He then invites Donald Trump to say some words. By the way, incredibly gracious words by both men. Incredibly gracious words, and considering the relationship before and since, really remarkable. But the look on Donald Trump's face and his body language and his words, it struck me like the moment had really dawned on him as well. Here he was in the Oval Office. He had just spent an hour or so with Barack Obama describing some of the most intense challenges that he would be facing as soon as he took the oath of office. He's in a room where so many weighty and massively important decisions have been made. And I think it really took him a moment to process, and he did seem humbled by what he was coming into. By the way, I did something which I don't really do. I had my cell phone, and when we were brought into the Oval Office, I just held it like this, and I had it on video, and I have this video walking into the Oval Office. I couldn't put the video in the book because we don't have that technology, but it just so, and I hadn't looked at, and then I took a lot of pictures when I was in there, and I didn't really look at these until I got down to writing the book. And you see it, and I put one of the photos in the book, and you see that look on him. It's a different feel. Now, he quickly got back to the Donald Trump we've all known for so long, but I think the moment the moment really he realized this wasn't just a political battle. He was about to take on the greatest responsibility in the country, if not the world.
Yeah, and perhaps maybe the first time he really felt the weight of the office. He wasn't yet president, but he saw for the first time what he was getting into, I guess.
Yeah.
You have covered, I think it's 4 United States presidents, President Trump being the 4th. This is a hard question, but if you were to cite what's the most important difference that you see in President Trump than the other 3 presidents that you've covered? Is there something that stands out to you? I mean, I know there's a lot of differences.
There's a lot, but there's one really big one that kind of encompasses a lot of the specifics, and that is Donald Trump follows his own counsel to a degree to which none of the others. I mean, every president ultimately is the decider, as George Bush said, but in being the decider, each one of those other presidents followed a pretty elaborate process. Sometimes you call it the interagency process on making a decision. You have a National Security Council. By the time the decision comes to the White House, to the Oval Office, it is, those are the most difficult decisions because they couldn't be resolved down the chain. And there have been a lot of people that have weighed in on those decisions. And there's a, analysis, there's conflicting views and opinions all laid out, and the president, ultimately will make the decision, but so many others weigh in. With Donald Trump, he governs by gut. I dug up an old interview that he did with Barbara Walters in 1987. Can you imagine? Where Donald Trump was making a trip to New Hampshire. And right in the middle of the Republican primary, getting started. He goes up there, Pat Robertson's up there, Bob Dole's up there, George Bush had just done a trip. And so you have all the candidates running around. Here comes Donald Trump, and he speaks to a Rotary Club in Concord, and draws bigger crowds and everything. So anyways, it was a big thing. So Barbara Walters did a story for 2020 on it, a big profile on him. And he was only, I think, 41 at that point, something like that. And she says, "What's your big plan? Of course, tries to say, are you ever going to run for president?" They dance around that. He says, no. But what are your big goals? You've accomplished all that you've accomplished now. What do you want in life? Where do you want to go? What are your goals? And it's clear that he doesn't have an answer for her, because what he gives an analogy. He says, "Look, I don't have a grand master plan. I believe, like the prize fighters, when you get into a ring, you go with the punches and you see where you're going to go." And Donald Trump goes in there and he goes with the punches, and he makes the call on just about everything, from press releases that are being sent out of the press office. Obviously, when John Bolton was national security advisor, Bolton had a chance to brief him and talk to him on that. But Donald Trump took his own. I mean, do you think John Bolton would have ended up with negotiations with Kim Jong-un a couple rounds? Do you think? I mean, he governs without a master plan, master strategy. He goes with his gut to a degree that I never saw in the presidents I covered. I don't think we've ever seen in any president.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a remarkable thing. I never in my political life, in the years I've spent in politics, imagined it would be ever possible for any human being to have that office and to govern through pure instinct. It really is an amazing thing. I want to talk about the word uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is you and many others do spend a lot of time in the White House press room, Oval Office, what have you. The interchange between the press corps and the president, or the press corps and his various press secretaries, watching it through a television screen, even from a great distance, oftentimes it feels like, boy, is that ever uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you know, and by that I mean just the tension in the air for just almost every question. And I wonder, this is what you do for a living, right? But is it uncomfortable to you too, or are you just able to kind of wall that out?
Well, there's certainly been some very uncomfortable, intense moments. I mean, I describe a scene in the book from late in the campaign where Trump walked out on an interview I did at a rally in Grand Rapids, by the way. And he walked out very quietly. He was like, "Look, you're going to ask me that? I'm you can go. You don't need to talk to me." And he walked out. And then I followed him out into the dark hallway. On one side was a black curtain where the rally was going on. You could hear the crowd cheering, ready for him to go. And he got just, I mean, back when the cameras were off, he started really going after me and calling me a nasty guy. And the rally went on. He spoke for about an hour, and then he actually came back. I had encouraged Corey Lewandowski, his campaign manager, like, you don't want to have him just, I mean, he should come back. We should finish the interview. And he did come back. And he came back as if nothing had happened. He couldn't have been friendlier. He couldn't have been nicer. He was like, nothing had happened at all. We finished the interview. And at the end, by the way, he did the same thing he did in 1994. And he said, "Do you want to get a picture?" And I was like, well, I mean, okay. I mean, I actually didn't really want a picture. I was still like stunned and shaken by what had happened. And I put that photo in the book as well, because he's got this big grin and I'm kind of looking like, when are we going to leave? But given the crucible of that experience, and given how long I've known him, when it gets really tense in the briefing room, and he's gone after me in the briefing room on several occasions, as you know, it doesn't bother me in a way. I go in there knowing that it might happen, because he likes to do that. He likes to have the fight. Sometimes I think he really doesn't mean it. Sometimes he does because he's upset. But sometimes I think it's part of the show. He likes the back and forth and the look that he's battling the press. He knows that his base really likes that. And then the thing is, you can see him, just like happened in Michigan, you can see him a little while later and he couldn't be nicer. I mean, over the course of this crisis, the current crisis, there have been some really tense moments with basically everybody that's been in that briefing room. But he's called me a third-rate reporter. He's called me a cutie pie. He's called me a wise guy. He's done a whole series of things. And the most recent thing he did was to praise my book in the middle of an event, the state dining room, before the cameras. I was asking some questions, and then he, out of the blue, he said, "By the way, I liked your book. It was a lot better than I thought it would be." And I mean about me, like it was fair about him. And he liked that. And I did. I'm always, I want to be fair about whoever I'm covering. And he asked me how it's doing. And I said, bestseller. Of course, he loved that. And he brought it up again just the other day at a thing. And he said, how's it doing again? I said, great. And he said, well, hot topic. It's a hot topic. So he doesn't really take it all that personally. Some of the reporters that you see him fighting with, he actually has a much better relationship with than you'd expect. That I'm not saying he doesn't genuinely get upset, but it makes me think a little bit about Sam Donaldson and Ronald Reagan. And there were some really tense moments back then, and not just Sam Donaldson, but Sam was the loudest and the most visible. And I've heard two stories that I think are really illustrative about that relationship. One I heard from Sam, which was Ronald Reagan came to DeSale Street in Washington to the ABC News Bureau when it was being opened, to dedicate it. Really high honor for the sitting president of the United States to come in and dedicate the Washington Bureau of a news network. So he came, and ABC's executives and ABC's, everybody wanted to make sure the red carpet was rolled out. Reagan was coming. He was doing something very nice and gracious for ABC. Well, Sam Donaldson knows that, he's got a story to do that day. So he stakes him out on DeSales, which is a little small side street, and starts yelling questions at Reagan as he's going into the bureau. And this infuriated his bosses. I mean, to the point of they were ready to really like, really punish Sam for this. And the way Sam tells the story is Reagan stuck up for him, and totally said that this was appropriate. He's doing what he should be doing. So that's one story. And Sam ended up not getting, I don't know if he would have been fired over that, but he could have been like put in timeout. I mean, who knows? But he got, the executives forgave him because Reagan was incredibly gracious about it. The other story, Lou Cannon told me that Lou Cannon was going in for one of his many interviews with Reagan in the Oval Office, and President Reagan had an event in the Rose Garden immediately preceding the interview. So Lou Cannon was in the Oval with some of the senior staff waiting for that event to wrap up. And as the event wrapped up, Sam Donaldson did his thing, was bellowing questions at President Reagan, and it really infuriated the senior staff, who were like, "That damn Sam Donaldson," as President Reagan came into the Oval Office. And according to Lou Cannon, President Reagan said, "Leave Sam alone. He's doing his job." And, so the graciousness with which Reagan dealt with a press corps, which was often really, really tough and hostile that he was facing, is very different from the way Donald Trump has dealt with it. But ultimately, Trump engages with the reporters that cover him, knows the reporters who cover him, talks to them, gives access to, often praises moments after he's criticized. It's a very complicated relationship, and it's not just the hostility that you see on television.
Yeah, just amazing. The fact that after browbeating you in public over some particular question, that he can bring himself to 10 minutes later or what have you to take a picture with you, or he's got some of that same capacity. It seems he may not show it to the public, but the same kind of capacity. You're doing your job. I think is essentially what he's saying. That's neat to hear. In those moments, it's hard to believe, like, as you've said, President Trump will use the press as a foil, but when he appears to be angry and upset over a line of questioning, it's human nature. In some respect, he must actually really be upset. He does take some of this personally. Do you agree with that?
I do. I think that there are multiple facets here. So, in one level, he knows that vilifying the press is effective strategy. He likes to define the press as the opposition party, and by doing so, if there is a critical story, it can be dismissed as, well, what do you expect? It's the opposition party. It means it's fake news. It's like as if the DNC released a press release. So on part of it is strategic. Part of it is also he does like the performance of it. So when he gets in a big battle with reporters, it adds a little excitement. During the course of the presidential campaign, the primaries, he did something I've never seen any candidate do, which is on the evenings of the big primaries, most of the times the candidates wait for results to come in, go out and give a speech, and then leave. He didn't just go out and give a speech, he held a press conference. Because he preferred the back and forth with the reporters than just going out and saying his message. And I think that was the same with the course of this pandemic, frankly. He liked that back and forth, including, some of those tense moments. But that said, that there are times he feels something that I think every president since George Washington has felt, which is that the press corps is relentlessly negative, does not pay attention to successes, only focuses on failures. We report the planes that crash, not the planes that land safely. And every president that I've studied felt this. I know, I can assure you, Barack Obama felt this intensely and was very thin-skinned. He didn't show it as much, publicly, but was infuriated by what he felt was the press focusing on trivial matters and not focusing on, major accomplishments that he was doing and being too negative. Yes, Barack Obama felt that way. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson, if you want to go back, felt that way. Jefferson, I talk about this in the book. Jefferson, famously said that if he was given a choice in living in a society without government or without newspapers, he would easily pick a society without government. Well, that was early on. That was before he became president and had to deal with a very hostile and partisan, press. And he said, into his presidency, into his second term, don't believe anything that is written in a newspaper. That was Thomas Jefferson who said that. You might say he was talking about fake news. So it's not a new phenomenon with Donald Trump, but again, it's just so much more explosive.
Yeah. You discuss the subject in your book, Jonathan, which I really have to give you kudos for this, because if you watch the interaction between yourself and the president, or generally speaking, the press corps and the president, if you're a Trump supporter, like, boy, is the press ever unfair to this guy, and they see, it's like the media is taking sides, and there is a thread of, I think you've seen, there's a thread of truth to that. I'm not saying you're reporting, I'm just saying some news organizations or some individuals seem to have taken the bait, have they not? And lost a sense of perspective as to what their role is.
Yeah, and I do think that there is. I do think that's the case, and I write about the dangers of the press appearing like exactly the way Donald Trump actually wants to define the press, which is as an opposition party. And I do think it's more than pointing to any specific story here or there. It's more the overall thrust of the coverage is relentlessly negative. And again, it's our job as reporters to ask hard questions, to investigate, to hold public officials to account. So by definition, a lot of the coverage is always going to be negative. We're not here to talk about how wonderful a job the elected official is doing. That's I mean, there may be times to say that, but that is not, that's not what you come to work trying to do every day. And that should be true regardless of who you're reporting on, not, picking and choosing. But I think that if at any point over the past 3.5 years, you were to tune in to cable news, you would see, oh my God, look what he just did. Oh, well, it's outrageous. Look at this outrage, and so much so that you can't distinguish between relatively minor things that don't matter very much and really major things that do warrant intense coverage. I talk about a story, and I'm critical. I look at myself critically as well. But there's a last fall there was a Hurricane Dorian was approaching the state of Florida, and Donald Trump mistakenly said that Alabama was in the path. I was the first network correspondent to mention that in my story, by the way, and it was a minor mention at the end of a story, and I pointed out that he said this, and the National Weather Service in Birmingham corrected him. Not a huge thing, but it infuriated him to be corrected, and he got mad at me. He tweeted at me actually, and he called me into the Oval Office. Another scene I describe in the book the next day. But that whole week became dominated by that story. Now it's because after Trump made the initial mistake, he also compounded it. He brought out the Sharpie pen on the FEMA map. He was obsessed with it himself. But if you were to watch that, you would have thought that we had just invaded Iraq again. It's like, it doesn't really matter. It wasn't like people in Alabama were cowering in their basements because they were afraid of a hurricane coming that wasn't coming. I mean, it was a minor thing. It was insignificant. It was blown up both because of the way the president reacted to the initial reports and because of this obsession in this tendency to just, it's like this it's the tonnage of the negativity. And I think that reporters should report the facts without fear or favor. I actually like the old slogan that Fox used to have, and they don't really use it anymore, but fair and balanced. I think that should be the approach. And look, the Obama White House got really irritated with me over and over again because I went in there and I had some tense moments, many of them in the briefing room with Jay Carney, with President Obama. And back then, some of the same people that are criticizing me and others now were praising. It's like, oh, at least there's somebody willing to stand up to him. But that's our job, And yeah, I'm gonna ask questions that are gonna really annoy Donald Trump from time to time, and I'm gonna have stories that are gonna annoy him. It's not because I'm trying to annoy him; it's because I'm trying to do my job and to report the facts wherever the facts lead.
Yeah, understood. You make there's a few sentences in your book, Jonathan, where you talk about the environment in the world environment in America, where I think your words were, it's not a particularly safe time, or it's not a particularly safe environment for reporters. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what you meant by that, and if that's particular to this moment or throughout your career. Things don't seem to be as safe as they used to be. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very tense time, and I actually had this discussion with President Trump. I talked to him in September of last year. I write about this as well, where I tell him that this enemy of the people talk that he does, that he likes to do, and he tweets about it, he uses it in his stump speeches, and it's beyond your normal criticism of reporters, of the press. And I said, and this was a conversation I had with him less than 2 weeks after the shootings in El Paso and in Dayton. And I said to him, I'm concerned that rhetoric, that people will hear you say those words, and some crazy person will take those words to heart and act on them. And the reference was obvious, but he didn't process it, and he actually said to me, well, I hope they take my words to heart, because I think that fake news is the enemy of the people, et cetera, et cetera. So he says that. I know that he doesn't mean it in a violent context. I mean, obviously not. But I worry that people hear those words, and by the way, you hear really awful things on the other side as well. I mean, the vilification of the press is not on the right alone at all. I mean, you saw some of this carry out actually even in the Democratic primaries this time around. So there were times where Beto O'Rourke sounded a little bit like Donald Trump, if you go back and see in terms of what he was saying about the press, for instance. So we now have a situation that started during the campaign where news organizations actually send security to accompany reporters to rallies, and it's. And we've seen some violence, and we saw, of course, the crazy, the person who sent failed letter bombs to CNN. That it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much.
Yeah, you're right, and I hope you stay safe out there.
Yeah.
Chopper talk. Now, I guess I've been away from Washington D.C. too long, because I certainly have watched for many years presidents head off to Marine One. I've got one about.
What are you saying?
Yeah. I mean, do you know the history of chopper talk? I mean, I understand it on a surface level, why it's done, why the president takes advantage of the moment and hears what he wants to hear and doesn't hear what he doesn't want to hear. But why does the press put up with that? Is that simply, all that noise? Is it because, well, sorry, it's one of the few moments that you can get where the president, will come up and somewhat impromptu talk to you.
And most presidents did not really engage. I mean, so presidents go out and I mean, it's like Reagan often was like, well, I can't hear you. Obama almost never did it. And if he did, it was going to be planned, and there would be a little podium put out there, and he would come and say a few words and get on the helicopter, but never an impromptu situation. That people were constantly yelling at Bill Clinton, especially after Monica, and he almost always just beelined it right to the chopper. And Donald Trump didn't take questions for a while. It was it was almost like he finally realized that he was walking past all the cameras, and he had an opportunity he loves engaging the press. This is one of the great ironies of the Donald Trump presidency. There has been no president who more enjoys the back and forth and being in front of those cameras, and whether it's sparring and fighting or he actually loves this stuff. And one of the first times he started doing this, Sarah Sanders was the press secretary, and I'll never forget. I was out there, and usually, as reporters, you go out there and you basically, because you might be able to shout a question and not get it answered, but at least you've tried, or you just watch. First of all, it's a beautiful scene. You're on the South Lawn, the helicopter takes off slowly. I mean, it's a beautiful scene. But so I happened to go out there, and lo and behold, Trump, usually he just waves coming out of the Oval Office and gets on, but he looked, he's like, oh, and he just started walking towards us and taking questions, and there was no staff around. So he takes one or two questions, and then I look over my right shoulder, and jogging across the Rose Garden, here comes Sarah Sanders to catch up to find out what the heck the president's talking about. So again, not particularly strategic, but by the gut, he saw the cameras. He's like, yeah, what the hell? I'll go out there and do it. So in terms of reporters, our thing is, if you've got a chance to ask the president questions, you do it. And by the way, some of the criticism that I hear of the press corps now from the other side is, why don't you all walk out? Why do you put up with these briefings? Why don't you, refuse to ask any questions? Why don't you just not attend? And there's a basic, because it's our job. I mean, and if he wants to yell at us and insult us, it's our job also, for the most part, to ignore that and stay focused on what the real story is.
Yeah. Just a few more questions, John. This one I want to kind of broaden out and ask. It's probably in the thousands and thousands of interviews that you've done in your career. Is there one that stands out to you where you say, you know what, that has made this career worthwhile? And and then on the other side, is there one that you could have, just frankly, looking back, you could have done without? And this could be whether it's the White House or any New York Post, any of your interviews.
I've been blessed to do so many that are so fascinating and have introduced me to so many remarkable people. I think one of them, I'll give you a really obscure one on the plus side. Colonel Kittinger is an Air Force colonel who I read about just randomly. I think I actually read about him while I was on summer vacation in a magazine article. I'd never heard of him before. He, for years, for decades, held the record for the highest skydive in history. 1960, he went to the edge of the atmosphere, something 100,000 feet or so above the Earth, and on a helium balloon, wearing a spacesuit, and came down, broke the sound barrier on the way down. And for years, people tried to break this record, and it was actually broken about 4 years ago or so for the first time. So it stood for all those years. I interviewed him before it was broken. I just saw this article, and then I saw that he was about to be honored at the Air and Space Museum. And I went and interviewed him, and I had no idea, but I'd never seen such a, such an incredible American life. So he did this because he was in the Air Force, and it was like the beginning of the space race. And one of the big questions was, if you send a person into outer space, what do you do if there's a problem? Is there any way you can eject and come back down to Earth safely? So this was to test that proposition that you could. And the Air Force wasn't particularly into this program, and of course, NASA is getting started and they don't want the competition. So it's like he's kind of on his own when he does this thing. But after this great success, it is shut down, and he goes, he's a fighter pilot. He goes to Vietnam. He gets taken prisoner he gets shot down, ejects, is taken prisoner of war, serves in the Hanoi Hilton, overlapping with John McCain, and is thought to be dead after his plane was shot down. As a matter of fact, his family back in the United States was told that he had been killed, and it was only sometime later that they realized he was actually taken prisoner. He comes back after the war. He retires from the military. He becomes the first person to go in a balloon over the Atlantic Ocean. Anyway, I just got to meet this guy and interview him and hear his story and see a true American hero, many times over. So that's the kind of thing, is to meet and get a chance to engage with people like that. Of course, there have been great political interviews all the time. I think in terms of covering politics, I never had more fun than I did covering John McCain's campaign in 2000, where I was one of the reporters on the Straight Talk Express with him. In terms of the interviews you could do without, I don't know. There are a lot, probably the ones that I would do without, I wouldn't even remember, because the reason why is because they didn't go anywhere. Probably a lot of those are politician interviews,
Sure. Yeah.
So look, you interview people of all different kinds. I think, one of the other interviews that really stands out to me is I interviewed Louis Farrakhan right after, a year after the Million Man March. And it was a really tense interview. He talked about a guy that attacked, he went after me in a way that was like, I think even beyond anything Trump's done, but it was a really hot and intense interview. And it was 1996. I had just started at CNN. And I think it was a crucible that probably helped me prepare me for any other interview after that was going to be easy.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay, last question, kind of wide lens as well. How about a personality that you have interviewed over the years where the person turned out to be just remarkably different than you might have expected? Someone that surprised you in a positive or a really negative way, where it was like, wow, that was not my impression of who this person would have been, and hopefully it might be somebody that we would, recognize. I don't know.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. I've, I had an interview with Elton John, which was, I was just so excited about, because, I grew up listening to Elton John, and it was gracious. He did the interview, and it was an interesting interview, but he was quite gruff and
kind of a letdown in a way.
A little bit of a letdown, I went, of course, it was probably my fault, because towards the end, I'm like, you got to tell me. So what's Elton John's favorite Elton John song? And he was like, okay, whatever, what do you want? I've been asked that question 10,000 times, and then keeping in the kind of musical side of things. Who was really phenomenal, but I can't say different, was Ernie Banks. I interviewed Ernie Banks. He got the Medal of Freedom and it was a year before he died. And it was so much fun because I went in. I went in with him. I dug out, and you can find this online. It's really fun. Ernie Banks, one of the greatest baseball players ever, and the scouting report, the initial scouting report when he was coming up, it was so good. It was so fitting with who he's all about. And then I read him a list of the baseball players that have both won an MVP and the Medal of Freedom, and it's a really impressive list. You know, it's like Ted Williams, I think DiMaggio's on there. It's a really phenomenal list. But every time I showed him something, he took the paper from me. He's like, "Wow, that's really interesting. Let me take that." And he predicted to me. He said the Cubs. Well, he'd always predicted every year the Cubs were going to win the World Series. But he's like, we're going to do this, and when we do, come and watch a game with me. And then he died the year before they went on to win.
Yeah. That's a great story. Great story. I've read about Ernie Banks. It's neat that you got to meet
in the
him.
East Room, no less. I mean, I did this right after he got the Medal of Freedom in the White House. Just really, really something else.
That's neat. That's neat. Well, Jonathan, you've been so gracious with your time and to get with us today after such a busy moment in your life, and having a book like this out. I really recommend this. I loved this book, and it's a credit to you, Jonathan, that President Trump said he'd liked the book too. I think people, whether you're for Trump or against Trump or for the media or against the media, you started off by saying, you might have liked to have been a historian when, in some respects you have been, and this is a piece of history, and it's just wonderful to spend time with you. And I hope people can pick this book up because it's a really excellent book. So thank you for writing it, and thanks for your time today, Jonathan.
Thank you very much. A true honor. And the book was written not to make a judgment, but to tell I think a remarkable story, and hopefully be something that historians will be able to look at to try to get a sense of what this period was like. And people who do not like Donald Trump at all and think he is a threat to our country have given me very positive feedback on this book. And people who, including the president himself, who like Donald Trump, and said this is an incredible story and you told it fairly. So I hope that it has appeal kind of across political lines.
Yeah,
thank you very much. Really an honor.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Let's do this in person once life gets back to normal. Okay.
Absolutely, we'd love to have you out. Not socially distanced. So
right.
Okay. Take care, Jonathan.
Right, take care. Thanks a lot.
You too. Bye bye.